Good morning and thank you for joining us. I hope you are all doing well and staying safe. This morning we are shooting live from Night Glass Media Group studios here in Atlanta, Georgia, and also online from West Palm Beach, Florida and Virginia Beach, Virginia. Now I know we are all living in unprecedented times, but there are actions and activities that leaders, organizations, and teams can be doing right now to not only survive, but thrive in the current environment. Today, I brought together some experts who are going to talk to you about some tools and techniques that you can use. Things like crisis action planning, debriefing, and the leadership skill sets necessary to bring it all together. Now, our first guest is Aaron Tucker. Aaron is a former Navy SEAL and Director of Organizational Development at Taking Point Leadership, which is a consulting firm that specializes in implementation and cultural transformation work. Aaron is a PhD candidate and has ran successful 5X tech startups and has led teams of behavioral sciences in developing the leading indicators of employee engagement. Our second guest is Scott Leonard. Scott is a former U.S. Army M1A1 tank gunner and founder of Mission First, Inc., a commercial strategy and operational excellence consulting firm. Scott has worked in multiple industries, including cloud, SaaS, tech, retail, CPG, finance, banking, pharma, and many others. From small cap to Fortune 100, including working with 9 NFL teams, players, and coaches. And finally, my name is Patrick Houlihan. I'm a former Marine fighter pilot and founder and CEO of Strategic Leadership Consultants, where we build inspired, compassionate, mission-driven leaders. I've worked with Fortune 100 and 500 organizations, not only designing, but executing their strategic initiatives, establishing a culture of debriefing, and teaching leadership skills through organizational development work. So let's please welcome our guests. Gentlemen, how are you doing? How are you handling the lockdown right now?
Doing well, probably like everyone, dealing with a very different set of circumstances, but figuring out a way to survive, thrive, and dominate in this new environment.
Got it. And Aaron, I know you have been working with clients. What have you seen from them? How are they handling this new dynamic?
You know, I think the biggest thing that we're seeing right now openly comes down to being able to quickly react and be more proactive around basically a planning process that allows for rapid change within both agile and waterfall type constructs right now.
Now, I know all three of us have military experience. How does this relate to what we're doing right now and experiencing? How does that relate, and what are some of those techniques or those skill sets that you built in the military? How do they apply now into the business world?
So I think openly, I think that's a great question. And one of the things that we continuously point out to our clients, I know all three of us do it, is, I can only speak from my background, but as a SEAL, and I know it's not different than obviously Scott or Patrick, the reality is we lived in chaos. We deployed, we trained, and we almost embraced it. And I think what that allows us to do to relay, as well as facilitate and teach our clients, it truly comes down to the ability to have that very quick pivot based on I'll call it a standardized process that allows for both identifying where we're trying to get to, how we're going to get there, but also the reality that we can't sit and have paralysis by planning. And we have to get out there, start executing, start identifying the change, and start becoming more proactive instead of reactive to it. One of the big things that we continuously hear is, I'm great at putting out fires. Well, we're in the biggest forest fire we've had in a long time right now, right? But wouldn't it be nice to have been a little more proactive instead of, put out the match before it actually lit the forest on fire? And so I think that's the biggest thing we have is the fact that within the military, within the special operations, elite military units, what we know is that being able to pivot and rapidly change and execute and deliver the things we need to, almost no matter what, with the resources we have, whatever thin or ever how many we have, is truly what's going to allow our specialty of what we've done for decades at this point to kind of translate that to the business.
Yeah, Aaron, you make a great point. 4 to 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, the big talk was the shutdown. How are we going to survive? What are we going to do? And now, just recently, it's how we're going to reopen. And I think a lot of the things that we did in the military in terms of things like crisis action planning have served us well in being able to adjust and adapt to the current environment. Now, Scott, we talked yesterday about crisis action planning and some of the steps that companies can take. Can you take us through some of those steps and what needs to happen?
Absolutely. It's very similar to what Tuck just said. It's really about focusing on the art of the possible. So for crisis action planning, like all things in the military and for hopefully most things in business, there's a methodology. We start by defining the problem. It's really about determining that problem statement. There's multiple processes and ways to do that. Next, you identify the obstacles and opportunities, not just what you can do, the art of the possible, what's short term, midterm, or near term, but also what's between you and those opportunities, those objectives. Next, of course, you develop those goals very formally, and you can use SMART goals, you can use OKRs. There's a host of ways to very formally develop those goals to ensure everyone not only understands them, but you have an opportunity to get buy-in, ownership, and accountability to the goals. Next, we very quickly match resources with obstacles. What's available to us as a resource in the near term? What do we think we'll have available but is too far out, so we've got to make a plan without it? And just quickly match up those resources to those obstacles to ensure we can course correct as we go and we have the assets necessary to achieve that objective and seize the opportunities. Next, we just develop very specific action steps in its most simple format: who does what by when, on an individual, never a group. A what is time date stamped with a when, and we try and make those adjustable because we know we're going to need to pivot. Then a contingency plan. Mike Tyson once said, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. There's a lot of sayings in the military about all plans being equal until the first bullet is fired. Regardless of the metaphor, we know that we've got to have contingencies in place because we know no plan ever goes perfectly. What will we do when we run out of a resource? What will we do when a resource never materializes? What will we do when new threats present themselves? What will we do when the objective we're seeking no longer has the value it initially had? Do we scrap the mission? Do we adjust? Do we pivot? So these are all things to consider before you get into action, before you make contact with the market, with competitors, with customers, with clients. And last but not least, as we've kind of hinted at in all of these steps, it's a very dynamic, fluid process. What is your feedback loop? How soon can you get mostly authentic, because you'll never get perfect data, but how soon can you get mostly authentic intel to allow you to recognize when you need to adjust or pivot using a very agile mindset and methodology? Does that make sense, Lips?
Absolutely, Scott. You know, one of the things you mentioned right at the beginning is defining the problem. And I think there are a lot of organizations and individuals, at least some of the ones that I've come in contact with, defining that problem. I mean, it's huge right now, right? Or it seems to be huge because they're looking at the macro level. What would be some advice you could give organizations, teams, leaders on defining the problem? How should they think about what they're facing and what they're experiencing right now?
Yeah, at the highest level, very simply, you start with your strategic objectives and then you work down to your tactical capabilities based on the new normal, the set of circumstances and variables in the environment in which you find yourself. If you're thinking tactically because the environment has changed so dramatically, you're very likely going to execute towards objectives that aren't even aligned to your overarching departmental or enterprise strategy. So go back and revisit your strategic objectives. Maybe even go back and revisit your value charter. Why does your group exist? What are you here to do? And based on those values and mission statements, break those down into what strategic objectives you can pursue in this new environment, in this new normal.
Do you have any advice in terms of resource allocation or identifying resources that can be used?
Absolutely. And typically when we are in the calm, cool oasis of the planning environment, we often get a little aggressive or optimistic about what we can do in the short term. And equally, we often find out that we are a little less ambitious about what we can get done in the long term, 180 to 365 days. So what you want to do when looking at resources is put a very critical eye on what you'll truly have the access to and the depth and breadth to which you can leverage that resource against an obstacle and align to achieving the objective you pursue.
Yeah, and I think your last bullet point about establishing a feedback loop, something that happens very quickly. You know, when I went through the Army War College, one of the things obviously they talk about is something called CCIRs, or Commander's Critical Information Requirements. These are the things that you would wake the boss up at night for. You go pound on the, if you're deployed, you go knock on the door. Hey, skipper, get up. This is what happened. And I think that's something that needs to be established by leaders to their teams. This is the information I need to know right now so I can make that adjustment and pivot. Now, to have that type of environment and that type of culture, I think one of the critical things you need to do is to debrief. It's something that if you aren't doing, you should be doing. And it's something that we have always done, and it's just part of our operating cycle from the military. Now, Aaron, I know as a Navy SEAL, debriefing is something that you probably did every single day, or at least after every single mission. So can you take us through some of the steps of debriefing and how organizations can execute? What are some of the tools and techniques that they can use?
Yeah, absolutely. Debriefing is honestly key. From the things that we teach business, it's probably one, again, that's my opinion, but it's probably one of the most important and most prominent things or tools that we can actually give an organization, or leaders for that matter. But in order to begin that debriefing process, the first thing you have to be is intentional. So it has to be done regularly. You can do it informally, formally, it doesn't matter, but you have to be doing it in a structured way that provides an end state of what you're looking for. You can do it once a day, you can do it twice a week. Our recommendation is always do it no less than once a week. And so you need to debrief to be agile, to be able to pivot, to be able to quickly maneuver around the operating environment that you're in. And so once you have that, then you begin to set that open and safe environment, right? And once you begin to create that environment of psychological safety, then we can truly start to have an effective debrief. And at that point, it's did we achieve what we said we were going to? Did we achieve what we set off to? Did we get to that, the end of that yellow brick road and find the wizard behind the curtain? And once we realize if we did or we didn't, then we develop that root cause analysis of things we did both well and things that we need to improve upon. Because ultimately, if we don't dive to that root cause analysis, we'll never actually know how we begin to change the leading indicators that are going to be that long-term, effect on the organization. And once we get that root cause, we can go in and actually begin to develop best practices for the organization. What did we do so well that we want to replicate, or what don't we want to do again if we made a mistake? Where can we improve, right? Because at the end, it's all about continuous improvement. That's what every organization truly is striving for, is how do we develop the continuous improvement, the feedback loop. And then finally, once we get through all of that, it comes down to ending on that high note. And so again, I want to kind of go back to that first one real quick, right? So we set the debrief rhythm, right? So when are we doing it? How often are we doing it? What is the structure that we're going to follow? One thing that we see, I'd say typically the first, the second iterative process, or the second time around, is typically people just aren't prepared because they don't know what to expect at a debrief. Or let's be honest, there's a ton of fear in a debrief. It was called a post-mortem up until a short time ago for a reason, because we only focused on failures. We only focused on the things that we didn't do well. And so this is that shift in the I'd say in what we teach and what we facilitate is we debrief everything: wins, losses, things or near misses, in the aviation industry. And so once we develop that and we develop that rhythm, we develop what we have to do to kind of set not just the location, but the expectations. We move into creating that environment of what's called psychological safety. And I know, Lips, this is something that was really big in the aviation community. I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
You're right, Aaron. I think one of the critical things in debriefing is establishing that safety net, having that safe and open environment. It takes me kind of back to my flying days when I first started flying in my operational unit. I had the commanding general of the 3rd Marine Aircraft Wing come and fly in one of my flights. So if you have, it's like having your president of sales or senior vice president come on a sales call with you. And so we're in the debrief. By the way, not only was he the commanding general, but he had also been a test pilot and a space shuttle astronaut. So this is the individual I have sitting in my flight. But generals don't fly that much, and he made a couple mistakes. And what was interesting and unique or eye-opening is when we started the debrief, he was the first one to step up and admit the mistakes. And it made a huge impression on me, because if someone who's been a test pilot, space shuttle astronaut, eventually ran NASA, he was appointed by President Obama, is willing to step up and admit his mistakes, then who am I not to do that? So establishing that safe and open environment really allows debriefing to become a teaching and a learning opportunity, which is, I think, is key. You talked about ending debrief on a positive statement and outlook. What are some examples of that, and why is that critical?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with the latter part of that question first. So, I mean, the reason it's so critical is we talk about things like employee engagement and, and motivating and kind of driving the workforce in the direction we want. But let's be honest, if we have in the military sense, an operation, a mission that went, wrong, or a project, an initiative, or even a sales call that didn't go as expected. Openly, we're all a little bit down because, it's not about just having skin in the game. It's about being emotionally attached to what we're doing. If we're an engaged employee or even a moderately engaged employee, the truth behind it is, if something doesn't go the way that we wanted or expected to, we get a little down in the dumps. And so by ending on that high note, what we're actually doing is realizing, hey, we did learn something. It didn't go perfect. But at the end of the day, we're going to pick up and keep moving because that's what we have to do, but also because we're still growing and there's still growth within the project, the initiative, that sales call, whatever it is that we're doing. And it's highlighting that fact that, hey, we learned, we grew, we moved on, but here's the reality. Maybe we didn't hit the end state that we wanted. We probably learned and we probably still moved the needle in some direction towards where we want to go. And I think that's the critical part because that's what's going to get those employees that call to action, so to speak. That's going to drive them to continuously keep pushing forward on that next initiative, knowing, hey, we weren't perfect, but no one's hammering us for that. It's just, hey, we learned, we're going to pick up, we're going to move on. And we're going to drive and engage our employees to keep pushing forward as fast as possible.
Yeah, and I think in today's environment, everybody is learning. And there are a lot of things, probably a lot of missteps out there as companies and organizations and teams are adjusting to this new dynamic and this new environment. And to have that positive outlook, that positive statement, that is really done by the leader. The leader is the one that has to put that together. So we've talked about crisis action planning, we've talked about debriefing, but what really needs to happen to cover all this is to have those leadership skills or those leadership techniques set in place. So I'm going to talk about a couple of those at a high level to how you can pull all this together. First thing, leaders, in this time frame right now, you got to ignore the noise. You got to turn off the TV, turn off the radio. Don't listen to the politics, okay? That hasn't changed. The infection counts, they're probably going to increase. So you have to ignore the noise and not bring that into the workplace and within your teams. I'm not saying you can't recognize that things are different and that things are challenging, but you don't want that to dominate the conversations that you're having with your team. The second thing is a leader really has to be a leader. And what I mean by that is your voice inflection, your tone, your demeanor. Are you giving clear direction or are you allowing everything to run amok? So you have to really be a leader because your employees and your customers and clients are reading you. A lot of things that we look at are nonverbal. It's not necessarily what you say, it's how you say it, how you look, and how you deliver it. The third bullet point is, as a leader, no complaining. You cannot complain in front of your teams. You can't complain to your customers or your clients about how bad the situation is. If you're a leader, complain to somebody that's on your level. But when I was in the military, our senior enlisted never complained in front of the junior enlisted, officers never in front of enlisted, and the CO absolutely never in front of their unit. If you are complaining as the leader, then as that moves down throughout the organization, it'll become amplified and systemic, and you just can't have that. The fourth step is you got to get personal. And I'm not talking about just coming in and going, Bob, Mary, how are you doing? But you need to ask your clients, your customers, and your employees how they are personally dealing with this, how their families are, what are their concerns. Now is the time to really get below the waterline and understand what is going on with your teams. The next step is you have to think about shortening those planning horizons. Scott talked about crisis action planning, and really that is done because the horizon has shortened. So look at shorter timelines. The situation is very dynamic. Everything is changing quite quickly. So let's shorten those timelines so we can have executable goals and our people can have success. And the final step is you can't lose sight of the recovery, both in the short term and the long term. Now, unless your plan, your 2020 or your Q2 plan had a contingency for a global pandemic, those are out the window. Q2, Q3, 2020, just put them out the window and let's replan and look at the horizon. So what can we do in the near term and what can we do in the long term? Now, if you're in an organization and you have the luxury to have a team plan in the long term, you should do that. And really, they should come back with three things. What's the best case scenario, the worst case scenario, and the most likely scenario? So that when those happen, you can respond rather than react to the current dynamics. So we've covered a lot of things today. Now, what I like to do right now is turn it back over to Scott and Aaron for some final thoughts. Scott, what do you have based on what we've discussed so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you and Aaron have covered a lot of great ground. It's all about, with all this chaos, cut through the noise, focus on what you know, focus on what you can control, and then use a process, rely on a process and those around you to come together, develop the objectives, develop a plan, ensure that it's agile, ensure that you're debriefing along the way. And maybe most importantly, now more than ever, leverage your EQ. Remember, we're all in this together. We're all in this as a team. Think about the empathy. Think about what your folks are going through. Stay close to your people. Now more than ever, it's about leading with EQ and having a high level of understanding of what those around you are going through so you can come together as a team and achieve the mission.
Aaron, what are your final thoughts?
So I think I'm going to build on that a little bit as well. I think the reality is, look, the epidemic's hit. We're in COVID-19. We need to accept that in order to move on from that. You take what Scott said and use to standardize that process that's going to drive execution and drive leadership. But also we start focusing on where we want to be right now. We're already in the middle of the situation of COVID-19. So now is going to be the perfect time to start building through those standards, through those processes to get to where you actually want to be at the end of it. Because everybody is so reactive right now. It's time to be proactive. Start focusing on the future, not necessarily the long term, but maybe 30, 60, 90 days from now, and start driving to that. Start building out what the organization, what your team, whether it's your business unit, your functional area, start building out what that looks like and start getting to that end state. Because here's the reality. Transformation takes years for large organizations. And we've actually managed to accomplish almost a full transformation to remote working in 6 weeks? So let's build on that. Start focusing on how we're going to bring that back to whatever this new norm is and start building things around that. Because the reality is, we're in the fog of war. Let's get through that and figure out what it looks like at the end. So when we hit the end of this, we're already navigating to the success and to the win that we want.
Aaron, you make a great point about building and looking to the future. And even though things are chaotic and it's unprecedented and it's difficult, the one thing that we can't lose sight of is that there are opportunities out there. I've been working with some MSPs, managed service providers, and those that have sat down and went, okay, here's the reality, here's the situation, what and where is the opportunity, have done exceedingly well. Whether it's cybersecurity or moving their clients to remote work, getting them laptops, their business actually hasn't fallen off because they've been focusing on those opportunities and not just on the doom and gloom of what they're facing. You know what, folks? We are in unprecedented times. We all recognize that. But as leaders, if you give clear direction and guidance, you shorten your timelines, you plan fast, and then you do the all-important debrief at the end of every mission, at the end of every day, you will find success and we will all get through this. I'd like to thank our guests, Aaron and Scott, for spending time with us this morning and for imparting some knowledge. And I'd like to thank Night Glass Media Group for hosting us and allowing us to do this online and live. Everybody out there, stay safe, wash your hands. We're going to get through this. Take care and God bless.